In 1356, the Annesley family decided to demolish an old Norman church on their estate next to their home, Annesley Hall, and rebuild a new church, now known as the Annesley Old Church. Old, because many years later, in 1874, the then growing mining community Annesley Village, less than a mile away, opened the new Annesley All Saints Church, which is still in use today. The little building has a long history and has been mentioned in the works of Lord Byron in his Hills of Annesley and The Dream, and D.H. Lawrence's White Peacock. Lord Byron, of course, lived in the nearby Newstead Abbey, and D.H. Lawrence grew up in the not-so-far town of Eastwood. Situated just outside Annesley Village in Nottinghamshire, the old church and Annesley Hall are now in ruin. The church fell into complete disuse in early 1942, but as mentioned, it has been replaced by the newer All Saints Church in the nearby Annesley Village in 1874, when the community was expanding due to the mining industry and colliery in that area. From that point until its final days, it had only occasionally been used for sporadic services. The church authorities still own the site from 1942, but did nothing to preserve it. It did gain Grade 1 listed status in 1966 though, becoming a ghost-like monolith stood empty on the hill. In 1977, it was again awarded the status of being an ancient monument, being put on a risk register as a piece of local history, potentially being lost due to neglect. In 1979, it was purchased by Ashfield District Council for the extortionate price of just £1. Since then, it has been left to ruin, along with the old hall next door. It was only in 2011 when plans were made to preserve the site for historical uses due to a heritage lottery fund of £450,000. The restoration was overseen by the council and ended in July 2014. Since that time, it has become accessible to visitors interested in the old site. The nearby Annesley Hall, literally metres from the church, was severely damaged by fire in 1997, ceasing to be lived in since that time. It again suffered a further fire in 2015 and has been placed in the Heritage Risk Register by the English Heritage Organisation. The history of the hall dates back to the Annesley family, being built in the mid-13th century. It was then handed over to ownership of the Chaworth family in the 15th century, who kept it for the next 350 years. The building was extended and developed significantly in the 17th century by Patrick Chaworth, who married Lady Grace Manners, daughter of John Manners, who was the Member of Parliament for Derbyshire from 1640 until 1641, when he inherited his peerage and became an earl. Later, the building was occupied by Mary Chaworth, who was the first lover of Lord Byron, who lived in the nearby Newstead Abbey at the time. It is quite possible that Byron's poem The Dream indicates the relationship between him and Mary. In only 1765, the father of Mary, George Chaworth, had a cousin, William Chaworth, who was killed in a duel by the great uncle of Lord Byron. So the family tensions range from the extremes of violence to romance. Mary Chaworth later went on to marry John Musters of Colwick Hall, situated on the other side of Nottingham. Their son, Charles Musters, actually sailed on the HMS Beagle with Charles Darwin. During his travels around the world, he died of malaria in 1832 on a visit to South America, to which Darwin wrote, "Poor little Musters, who 3 days before his illness only heard of his mother's death." Interestingly, An amateur spoof production of Dracula was performed at the old church by the J. Rich Group in 1963. That same year, the church roof was taken away due to decay. The building was eventually sold by the Chaworth Musters family in 1972, when its tragic fate was to occur only a few years later.